And I said, there should be something wrong in all of these things, in the model, in the system that we operate the internet with in the country. And then eventually I remember this day as it was now. I had a chat with my CEO, and I was very young, and I wanted to show some work. And eventually I had a lot of passion for the internet. And I was working heavily, and trying to understand where the user packets went through, and eventually everything which was searched in Angola went outside. So if you wanted to see a YouTube video, everything went outside. If you wanted to see a Facebook video, everything went outside, right? So eventually what I told my CEO back then was, hey, I think we need a strategy in here. And then he said, what do you mean? I mean, if everything goes outside of the country, it means we have to pay more. Because in the future, we're going to see people building only websites IPv6 only, which means if you are navigating on your browser and your internet service provider doesn't have IPv6 enabled, you won't be able to see that specific website. Let me give another use case again that I normally like to use. Portugal has 10 million of inhabitants, right? And most of the 10 million inhabitants that Portugal has, I think 60%, please correct me if I'm wrong, are elders or people above 65 years old, right? So Portugal has 16 cables landing in country, 16, 1 6, and 4 more to come until the end of next year, right? So do we really think that Portugal is landing all of these cables for these 10 million people? No. Portugal is thinking on the long-term strategy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to another episode of Africa Tech Talks. Today, our guest is Darwin Costa. Darwin is a senior business development manager for Southern Europe, Africa, and Latin America at DECIX, which is the world's leading carrier and data center neutral interconnection platform based in Frankfurt, Germany. So, welcome, Darwin. Thank you for sharing your time with us and being on the podcast.
Hi, guys. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. My name is Darwin Costa. I was born in Angola, and eventually I did my studies in the Netherlands, and then I went back after my studies to Angola to work for a company called Angola Cables. We were building the backbone back then in Angola and overseas, and since April 1st, it's not a April's Fool joke, but since April 1st, 2019, I joined DKIX, which is a company which was founded in 1995. And as Ivo well said, we are the leading interconnection ecosystem in the world. And what we do is building internet exchange points all over the world. Aside of my DKIX duties, what I do a lot of volunteer works related to the internet. I'm a co-chair of the AFRINIC Policy Development Working Group. I also work as a board member for the African Internet Exchange Association. And in Angola itself, I was one of the founders, or the founder for the Angolan Peering Forum, whereby we host the Angola Network Operator Groups Days, which goes in end with capacity building of our network engineers back in Angola.
Thank you so much, Darwin, for the introduction, and thank you for the correct way to pronounce the name of your company is DKIX,
Yeah,
right?
DKIX.
So I was spelling letter by letter, but it's DKIX. Okay,
Yes.
easier and faster. So, Darwin, today we're going to explore a lot of subjects and themes related to internet. So we're going to talk about subsea internet cables. We're going to talk about IPv6. We're going to talk about data centers and so on. But before going on that rabbit hole, we just going to share with our audience a video which is dated from 1999, which is an interview from David Bowie that he gave to BBC. And David Bowie, 25 years ago, so this is 1999, the internet was not the same as it is today, right? And he gave an explanation in his own terms and what he thought the internet was. So we're going to share this and then we'll kickstart our
Sure.
podcast.
Let's do it.
I don't think we've even seen the tip of the iceberg. I think the potential of what the internet is going to do to society, both good and bad, is unimaginable. I think we're actually on the cusp of something exhilarating and terrifying.
It's just a tool, though, isn't it?
No, it's not. No, it's an alien life form.
What do you think? I mean, when you think then about the
Is there
future of
life
it-
on Mars? Yes, it's just landed here.
But it's simply a different delivery system there. You're arguing about something more profound.
Oh yeah, I'm talking about the actual context, and the state of content is going to be so different to anything that we can really envisage at the moment, where the interplay between the user and the provider will be so in simpatico. It's going to crush our ideas of what mediums are all about.
Wow. Amazing. What do you think, Darwin? 25 years ago. An artist like David Bowie.
Yeah, well, I think the I think the guy had some good thoughts back then, right? I mean, it's 25 years back again, and I have a phrase which I used to use, which goes very in end with you just said, which goes like that. The internet is like fire, so you can use fire for two things, right? For the bad and for the good and for the bad. And this is it. Those are the times we are living in it.
Yeah, and it really seems like the internet seems like an actual living life form, and it can regenerate itself, it can heal itself. It can find different paths to make some information go from one end to the other one, and we are seeing a lot of technological advancements taking advantage of all the content that everyone in the world and even computers are producing every single day. But we'll get back to that. So my first question to you, Darwin, is about subsea internet cables. I don't know if everyone knows this, but the majority of traffic on the internet or intercontinental traffic goes through cables that are under the sea. So
Right.
I think intercontinental communications via satellite represent less than 1% of total internet traffic nowadays. Let's see what Starlink does to that, and many other players are trying to do. But for the time being, the majority of traffic goes through these cables. And just recently, in March of this year, 2024, we had major interruptions on internet traffic, right? I think the main fault area was on the cables, undersea cables under Ivory Coast. You correct me if I'm wrong or not. So, Darwin, how critical are these subsea cables to Africa's internet connectivity?
Well, I think those cables are crucial, right? I mean, I think we are living in a society where sometimes we take a lot of things for granted, especially the internet, right? I mean, nowadays we can use internet on air while we're on the plane, right? And so even being a cable guy, it's just amazing that I can do some work while I'm on the plane, right? Because I'm really addicted when it comes to internet usage and work and stuff like that. But obviously, like you mentioned, Ivo, most of the sending and receiving data nowadays, it goes through subsea cables, and we have a lot of cables under the ocean, right? And I still can recall when I went back in Angola back in 2011, right? So there was this project of building this new cable from South Africa all the way up to London, where Angola was part of the consortium which was built of a cable system called the West African Cable System, a WACS, right? And so we were a little bit terrified by not only the speed of light on that system, but also what we were doing as a young generation, right, for the country. Because just imagine, Angola was back then, I don't know what the population was. Currently, we are roughly 30 million. Back then, we could be less, maybe 20 million or 25 million or whatever. I don't have the numbers by heart now, but it was impressive to see that we could do so much, like David Bowie said, right, with the internet, with access to the internet. And again, I would just point out that we can live without the subsea cables. We can, we there is a lot of this SpaceX project is amazing, especially for the rural areas. Countries like Brazil can benefit from that. Countries like Angola definitely can benefit from that. But obviously, if you want, nowadays we have a lot of content and applications which are very latency sensitive, and just putting that into a perspective, and I will try to break down all these technical words that I'm using, like latency, right? So the time of sending and receiving information it became crucial, right? So if we're talking about playing video games, and if you're playing online, you cannot afford to have connectivity which is lagging, otherwise you're gonna get killed, or otherwise you might lose a FIFA game, So all of all of these
Or
things,
streaming,
or streaming,
content.
or
Do you remember
streaming,
the days
everything.
where we were at the back of our, in front of our computers, downloading music in, Napster or whatever, and it could
Gaza,
take hours
yes,
just to get
yeah,
in Kaza? Yeah, right. So it
yeah,
wasn't a
yeah.
problem back then for us, but nowadays it's almost intolerable if you cannot get access, really quick access to this information
Definitely,
and
and, and
content.
and that's why, yeah, and that's why I said, we many times we take this for granted because now we have too many cables under the ocean, right? And so eventually, if you are living somewhere, I don't know, in Europe or United States, and TikTok is not working, or even in Angola, if you cannot stream something, then users will get mad. Believe me, I mean, I have a daughter at home, and if Netflix doesn't work, she starts screaming, and I'm like, hey, listen, so I'm not your internet service provider, right? So you need to calm down, so we need to fix things, or at least try to understand what the problem is. Because
Yeah.
and like Ivo said, I think this new generation, they don't care about what the problem is. And Ivo just mentioned, we had cable cuts on the west coast of Africa. Yes, we did. And interesting enough, the cable cuts happening didn't only happen this time. It also happened in the summer last year. I think it was somewhere between August or September, also on the west coast, right? And these cable cuts can happen from many things, fissures or vessels, or earthquakes whatsoever. I mean, you can go very into details what the problems are, on these cable cuts. There are a lot of reports, public reports, which is good, right? We all can learn from it, have a quick read. But eventually the user experience will definitely get worse. And I think everybody on the west coast suffered a bit. I mean, at least the countries below Abidjan.
The end user, the regular citizen really doesn't want to, I don't care, just fix it. I need to access my WhatsApp. I need to access my TikTok, or I need to send an email or whatever. We are heavily dependent on the internet nowadays. Some countries, I think, already have the internet as a basic human right in their I don't know if it is the constitution or something like that, but we are thriving for that, right? It's just like I need running tap water. Oh, I also need internet. It's a basic
Mind
human
you,
right.
mind you,
Yeah,
Ivo,
Andre.
in the US, there are companies being sued because they don't provide internet. They have like trouble and problems with providing internet, so they're being sued for businesses that are not being done. Deals that
Oh
are
yeah,
not being closed. They're
yeah.
being sued for that. So this is a commodity. This is
It is
absolutely a
a
commodity.
It is.
So just to close on this, on the subsea internet cables, who is doing this? So this who lays subsea internet cables? Who operates them? Who manages them? Because when something happens, someone needs to go there and fix it. But what are the companies behind this? Just so our audience can understand a little bit better.
Yeah, and actually, I like to use real life use cases, at least from my experience. And if I can just use two use cases where I was part of the projects, the WAX cable, the West African cable system, and then the South Atlantic cable system, which was the first cable ever connecting Africa to South America. So there were two models on the back. The wax cable, it was a consortium model, right? So a couple of companies came together and decided, hey, we need to build a cable because there is demand and we need to address this demand. So a couple of companies came into agreement, cable was built. There are specialized companies building these subsea cables, and that the others will manage the cable well. Each cable has a lifetime of 25 years, right? So after 25 years, the cable is done. Just to have this, to put this into a context. And the
Okay.
first 5 years of operations of this cable are the crucial ones for the return on investment. Well, at least companies try to get the return on investment very quick on those cables, right? Because after 25 years, you have new cables coming in. And eventually, this wax cable was a consortium model whereby the South Atlantic cable, which was the cable connecting for the first time Africa to South America, Angola to Brazil, it was a private investment from Angola. So it was a 100% project led by Angola Cables, which is a multinational company in Angola. And so eventually,
Great.
Evo, just to go very quickly, also because you mentioned something about who manage this and how does the repair process happens if there is a cable cut, right? So eventually, in a consortium model, if there is a cable cut, the costs will be splitted. So that's a benefit, right? That's a good benefit to
Yeah.
have. Eventually, if you are the single owner of this cable and there is a cable cut between Angola and Brazil, then you as company, the company leading the project and managing this subsea cable, you're gonna be the one responsible to make sure that the repair process and all of the all the investments and all the SLAs, like Andre mentioned, needs to be fulfilled because companies will be down, right? So and then eventually someone will have to show his face up, right? And so those are the two models that we have in the industry.
Well, interesting. Now, Andre, it's all yours.
Thank you. Darwin, one of the questions that I have for you is what is the IXP and what is the importance of the internet exchange points? Before going into more detail and understanding the context, but I think that before our audience needs to understand a little bit more, what is this? Can you
Sure.
explain this further?
Yeah, sure. And again, Andre, let's break it down, right? I mean, I like to break down things because the end user or our listeners also need to understand the Chinese or the English or the French language we are speaking here, right? So eventually, on the telco, on the telecommunications world, you have a lot of layers, right? So you have the infrastructure layer, you have the internet layer, you have many layers, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so data centers, IXPs, subsea cables, and so on and so forth. So the internet exchange point is a crucial, and it is also seen in many countries as a crucial infrastructure. And why is that? Going back in time and give you a real life example. When I went back to Angola, the cost per megabit is what users pay, right? To have internet and to
Mm-hmm.
access the internet. And so eventually the price per megabit back then in Angola was more than 500 USD dollars. So it's huge. The internet penetration would be very low because nobody
Very
could
low.
afford it, right? And if we could afford it, like also Ivo said, we would be happy to have like a 64 base connectivity, die hub, nothing too much, nothing related to 10 megs or 20 megs, what we have now, which we now take for granted, right? So it was the very basic stuff were happening. And eventually I start thinking and I said, there should be something wrong in all of these things, in the model, in the system that we operate the internet within the country. And then eventually I remember this day as it was now. I had a chat with my CEO, and I was very young, and I wanted to show some work. And eventually I had a lot of passion for the internet, and I was working heavily, and trying to understand where the user packets went through, and eventually everything which was searched in Angola went outside. So if you wanted to see a YouTube video, everything went outside. If you wanted to see a Facebook video, everything went outside, right? So eventually what I told my CEO back then was, hey, I think we need a strategy in here. And then he said, what do you mean? I mean, if everything goes outside of the country, it means we have to pay more, right? So if we define a strategy to localize traffic, then eventually we will reduce the cost per megabit, which means to say that more people will be, or we will have the affordability to buy and to be on the internet, right? And so eventually the costs now drop to, I think, I don't have the figures by heart, but it's less than 50 megabits per $50 per megabits on the wholesale rate. So there was a significant change on the
Drop.
pricing, although I see a lot of comments everywhere, right? Oh, we pay so much money for the internet access, the internet doesn't work, and blah, blah, blah. Yes, people will always say that the internet is expensive, but eventually, if you don't have this part of the history, you will never understand where we are coming from. And so the internet exchange point, beside of being a crucial infrastructure for every country, it helps to maintain or to retain local traffic local. And in Angola, we have two. One, it's called the Angolan IXP, which was founded back in 1995 by the Internet Association, led by Mr. Silvio Almada. And then eventually in 2012, also part of the strategy that Angola Cables had in the past. We cooperated then with IXPs, the company where I work from now, and which I fell in love for what they did. Together we joined forces, and we then implemented an IXP called Dangonix. So one is more community driven, whereby the other one is more commercial driven.
So let me try to see if I understand. So the IXP is something that is part of a strategy to locate traffic in a certain place, in this case in a country, and this is
Right.
something that drops the price because the traffic becomes local instead of being driven to the entire network. And so what happened was that you were somehow a pioneer in finding out that you should locate traffic in Angola, and that dropped the price. So you're to blame when we can navigate in on our apps every day. Thank you so much. So and people don't understand that, and I understand because we use it so seamlessly throughout our daily life. That we don't even understand that people had to think the strategy so that this could happen. But tell me, and regarding to the strategy in the local area and region, what is the state of development of IXP in Africa, in the developed Africa compared to the less developed Africa, and in this case, the case of Angola, Mozambique.
Yeah. So, well, actually, no, that's a good. Thanks for pointing that out, Andre. Yes, and what normally people don't realize, and I don't blame them to not realize that, because I mean, each industry is different, right? I mean, a doctor would know what they do to operate someone. We would know what we have to do to send packets from network A to network B. So eventually, the end user don't need to understand that, right? But obviously, if something goes really wrong, they get quickly upset. They're gonna pick up the phone and call the TV cables of the life or the Unitos of the life. Hey, my connectivity is so poor and blah blah blah. Right? They have the right to do so. But eventually, like you said, the IXPs, by localizing traffic and content, because content is king, right? And if you can run applications like streaming applications or banking applications or whatever, for the end users in the country where they are surfing on the internet, it's going to be quicker, right? Instead of going to Portugal or going to UK and coming back again, right? That's a fact. That's a fact. Secondly, just go through your last question. Africa has evolved a lot. I think. Well, South Africa remains the largest internet exchange point in the continent. It's called NAP Africa. They have a lot of edges placed in Johannesburg, Durban, and Cape Town, and the one in Johannesburg is the biggest one in the continent. And obviously, then you see where the hubs are coming at, right? So Nigeria is becoming a hub because the second IXP, or the largest IXP, the second one in the continent, is in Lagos. It's called IXPN, and eventually, the more traffic on the exchange, you also can see that many other things will happen in parallel, like um, e-digital services or whatever you call it, right? So everybody wants to be to be online nowadays. I think there is also a phrase from Bill Gates, which he says, if there is a business which is not online, this business is gonna die, right? And eventually everybody's doing that, right? So even in Angola, I think, because you mentioned, Andre, I was one of the pioneers. Yes, I was, because when I went out for those meetings, heavily meetings, day in, day out, trying to explain what an IXP was, believe me, everybody was like, oh, so, okay, all right, it should be fine, But nowadays, if I look back in which networks are connected into those platforms in Angola, we even can see the National Bank is connected on one of the exchange points, which is only good for them because they need to exchange traffic with lower latency, right? Again, latency
with the
means
banks.
exactly the traffic that you are sending and receiving should be quick, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's good to look back at the end, but again, you needed to do something to be where you are now.
Very well. I think Ivo has another question regarding another topic, and I'm going to pass my voice
Your
to him.
mic. I got your mic now.
You got my mic.
Thank you, Andrea. So next topic for discussion is IPv6. So the Internet Protocol version 6. Most people don't know. Of course, we talked about the medium, right, to transport data from one side to the other, the sea cables, and it could be satellites. But in order for all the information to be routed properly, they have to have a own set of rules. And one of the main protocols that exists is IPv4, right? So so it works under the hood, and for the end user and the common citizen, it's magic. We just plug in the computer, we type an address, right, at our browser. We want to watch Netflix or YouTube or something like that, or open our email, and everything apparently works amazing, right?
Right.
So the main one of the main protocols that powers the internet, IPv4,
right,
needs to be, or is in the process of being modernized, so to speak. So there's this new protocol. It's not as new. It exists. I don't know. It's conceived in 2001. No, I'm making some mistakes here. But essentially, it's a new protocol.
In the 90s.
It exists in the 90s, right? Thank you. So it was developed in the 90s, but the majority of the world is still catching up. So I think Africa's IPv6 adoption rate is around 5% or less right now, average. Okay.
Average.
Angola, I think the figures are a little bit lower than this, I think. And worldwide, this figure is around 30 to 40% adoption. So lots of countries are already doing their part of the work and migrating from IPv4 to IPv6 while maintaining interoperability, right?
Right.
So tell me, why is this migration of this protocol, IPv6, so critical and important for Africa's digital transformation?
I think you said it right, Ivo. I think the last piece you just mentioned, digital transformation, and I will come back in a minute on this word, digital transformation, because I like it very much. Because the white book, it's called the Livro Branco das Telecomunicações from telcos in Angola. The keyword on that book, on each and every page that I have read it, said digital transformation. Right, so it's nice. We have a lot of words, nowadays we have a lot of buzzwords. Right now, everybody's stressing themselves about artificial intelligence and so on and so forth. Right, so these words will come up, but I will get back into this in a minute. Going back in what you just said, so eventually for networks to send packets from network A to network B, from users in one region to another regions, we needed protocols, right? So eventually we came up with IPv4 protocol, right? And eventually when someone is born, we get this birth of a certificate, right? So you get this birth of certificate, but eventually you go a few layers down, and then you need to take care of your ID card, and then you need to take care about your passport, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so those numbers that you get, those numbers are different, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right? The
Yeah.
ID card is different than the passport one. So if you put that into a IPv4 and IPv6 perspective, the need that we as the world have now to be dual stack, to be dual, um, uh, one with IPv4 and secondly with IPv6. We are not saying you should disconnect or migrate everything to IPv6. That's not what we are saying. What we actually are saying is that in order to afford everything which is coming up in this future, and what the Bowie just said in 1999, I think it was the video, right?
Yeah.
That you will need more than just the addressing which the engineers or the team or the working group thought back then. So back then we said, okay, we can go from 1 to 2000 IPv4 addressing, right? So that's what we thought in the past. But eventually, none of us here has only one device at home now,
True.
right? So eventually, back then we had only one single phone, but now we have more than one device. Even our TVs, even our TVs, the TVs have an IP addressing, right? So
The
only one,
watches.
the watches,
The
everything,
fridge, the fridge. I have.
everything, everything, right? And so eventually the IPv4 numbers that were allocated, for the entire globe was not enough or was not sufficient
Yeah.
to cope with what is coming, right? And
Yeah.
again, we are not saying you should migrating everything that you have for IPv6. No, that's not what we're saying. What we are saying is every network or every network on the internet needs to be prepared to be dual stack IPv4 and IPv6. You need to be prepared at the end of the day, because in the future we're gonna see people building only websites IPv6 only, which means if you are navigating on your browser and your internet service provider doesn't have IPv6 enabled, you won't be able to see that specific website, right?
Yeah.
And so it doesn't scale. And in order to
Yeah.
scale, we came up with a protocol called IPv6, which gives us millions of IP addressing, which can be allocated to the new business, new network
Yeah.
providers which are coming up, and so on and so forth.
So it's a massive address, a new address space. I have some notes here saying that IPv4 only provides about 4.3 billion addresses with its 32-bit scheme. So, but of course, if we think about it, we have almost 8 billion people on Earth right now, right?
There you go.
There you go. So I know that some of these challenges are being addressed. We will not bother the listeners or the public with this, with not, right? It's
Right.
another kind of technique or something that
Yeah.
helps remediate this limitation. But what you're saying is IPv6 it has come to stay. Nations and organizations are already doing the transition while maintaining backwards compatibility or maintaining you talked about the dual
legacy.
legacy. So
Legacy. Yeah.
So IPv4 will become legacy one day, complete legacy, right? And IPv6 is the future. Everything is connected now. We don't have just one device at our homes. Every human being nowadays, at least in the developed world, has, I don't know, 7 to 8 devices assigned to him, from mobile phones to
Right.
computers to I don't know, even intelligent light bulbs or something like that.
Whatever.
Almost everything IoT, right? So Internet of Things, for instance.
Connected cars, we see a lot in Germany, for instance, right? So for the company where I work from DKIX, so we see a lot of automotive industry companies getting connected to us, and you see a lot what's happening in a car, right? If you're driving nowadays
Yeah.
in a car and then you press a button, hey Siri, can you call number XYZ? You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's just massive. Again, I'm not saying that the legacy will disappear. That's what I'm saying. I'm just saying that everybody should be prepared for the future. And the future is bright. I mean, Brazil recently just reached 50% of IPv6 adoption. Gabon, which is next door to Angola, just reached 21%. So, you know, uh, and there is another complexity coming into play, and the complexity goes back into regulation part of the thing, and also the internet service providers of specific countries. I mean, let's put Angola into a perspective, right? So in Angola, most of the operators, whether they are mobile or fiber to the home, most of the equipments they are placing on the end user's home are not dual stake capable, so they cannot do IPv4 and IPv6 on the same time. So what's the current problem that they have? There's not a single policy in force in Angola which might force them to do so. And so eventually, if there is another policy to force them to do something, guess what? Nobody will do it. But eventually, if there is someone saying, hey, listen, our white book of telecommunications in Angola is telling us that we need to focus on digital, right? So the CPEs, what we call the equipments that we place, or that those guys place on the enterprise customers or end use customers, needs to be capable also to have IPv6 enabled. For what? For the future demand. Again, there is demand, even though people might not see it, but you need to close that gap. Everybody will need to close the gap. And eventually you see where the bottleneck is, right? So if those equipments that I placed on Andres or Victor's or Evil's apartments are not able to do IPv4 and IPv6 at the same time, oh, well, yeah, I have a big problem. I need to replace all of these equipments with new ones, and this will cost money. So eventually, there is not only the policy which comes into play, but maybe also, even the regulator could provide some benefits to the operators to make this change smoothly, right?
Yeah, like some kind of tax incentives or something like that. So what you're saying is there's the need to create incentives so all the parts that are responsible for this evolution, right, or are have the right incentives to accelerate this implementation of the IPv6
Definitely.
protocol. Okay.
Definitely. I think there was a European country. I cannot remember whether it was Estonia. I can remember, but I think it was Estonia. It was a top-down policy that came to all the operators within the country, which said, "You guys need to do so." Right? And eventually everybody will do it because someone told them, someone on the higher level thought about the strategy. This is what we need to do for the strategy, and this is what you guys have to fulfill or to be compliant, so we can prepare our future or the future of the next generations. If the legacy IPv4 runs out, I mean, and just go a little bit a few steps back. So the question that might be buzzing in your head is who gives those addressing, right? Those IP space. If I have a network, if I'm an internet service provider, and so each and every region as what we call the RIRs, the Regional Internet Registries. So for United States, it's a company called ARIN, and then for Brazil you have for South America you have LACNIC, and then for Asia Pacific you have APNIC, and then for Africa you have AFRINIC. Eventually, there is no more IPv4 left in all of those regions I just mentioned. There is only one region with IPv4 left, and that's AFRINIC. And you might ask yourself, why is that? Well, maybe because we're still the unconnected continent, as they like to call
Continent,
it,
yeah.
which is also partially true. I wouldn't say we are, very mature when comparing ourselves to Europe or even to United States or even to South America, right? We still have to make some progresses, but the good thing is we can learn from the mistakes they did, and we should do it the right way and not go after their mistakes.
Very good. Very good. Thank you, Darwin. So I'll pass to Victor.
Hey, Victor.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you more specifically about Angola internet infrastructure and connectivity. We are facing more recently several issues in terms of quality of service. Also, the demand keeps growing. So, what is your view now from that distance, and also knowing the local reality? What are your insights on the, 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 the local infrastructure, internet infrastructure, and connectivity?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, Victor. There is a saying on the internet which goes like that. On the internet, you can run, but you cannot hide yourself. So it means to say that whatever you do wrong on your network, things will get exposed, right? So things will get exposed eventually. If the QoS, the quality of service, is very poor, things will get exposed. Nowadays, we have a tool which is like um, the public market, right? Where everybody goes into it. And I have to say, I also did that once to my network service, internet service provider in the Netherlands, where I'm living currently. And the internet was so poor in that week, and I needed to do some streaming or calls or whatever. I still can't remember what my urgency was, but eventually I went to Twitter and I told these guys, I just did a hashtag, hey guys, your internet is so poor, you need to get that fixed. Believe me or not, their reply was quicker than me picking up the phone and calling them to tell them that I have a problem, right? So eventually they told me what the problem was and they tried to fix. Going back to the Angolan reality, Victor, and since I'm not there anymore, but I still have relatives living in there and friends like you guys living in there, and we see a lot of conversations going on every single chat, right? Oh, the internet is so poor, it used to be good, but now we are facing issues. I think just recently, what Ivo said, because of these cable breaks on the west coast, this has
Yeah.
affected badly Angola and many other countries on the west coast below Cote d'Ivoire. But it could be worse, and you might ask yourself why. Why do you say that? Let me
Yeah.
again put things into a perspective. So back then Angola, uh, before 2012, Angola only had one single subsea cable, which was a cable called SAT3, right? Which was one of the cables that also ended up in Europe. And eventually, back then, if this cable had a cut, then you can imagine that everything was blackout,
Yeah,
right?
they're completely out.
It was completely blackout. Nowadays, you don't have that anymore, luckily, right? Because the country currently has three subsea cables, and there is another cable which might be landing soon in Angola, which is the cable which was built by Facebook, aka Meta now, right? And so Angola is also part of this consortium, and we're gonna have this cable soon landing in Angola. So in total, we're gonna have four cables. Taking into consideration that the lifetime of those cables are 25 years, SAT3 is already dying. I think 3 or 4 more years, the cable will die, right? So we need a continuous replacement of those cables. And then the question of all those journalists that I can remember back in the days where, oh, but where is the return on investment? Oh, we spent 300 millions on this project. We spent so much money on this project. Where is the return on investment? Let me give another use case again that I normally like to use. Portugal has 10 million of inhabitants, right? And most of the 10 million inhabitants that Portugal has, I think 60%, please correct me if I'm wrong, are elders or people above 65 years old, right? So Portugal has 16 cables landing in country, 16, 1-6, and 4 more to come until the end of next year, right? So do we really think that Portugal is landing all of these cables for these 10 million people? No. Portugal is thinking on the long-term strategy, which is a good one. We need to think on the long-term strategy. We were used to download videos like Evo said in the beginning. You know, we were happy if a song was downloaded after 1 hour. Nowadays, if you want to watch X amount of videos on TikTok, you need bandwidth. You need more cables with more capacity on it, right? Because the demand is gonna only be more and more and more that we saw in the past. And eventually, again, Victor, just to go back to your point, the infrastructure has on a positive way evolved in Angola, although we still have a lot of handicaps. Like Luanda is only the connected city. The capital of the
Mhm.
country is only the connected city. But even in Luanda, not everybody can get fiber to the home, let alone someone living on the south of the country, right? So again, going back to Ivo's point, maybe there should be some taxes incentives to roll out that properly and to make it more affordable to people and to see the internet penetration growing more and more and more.
Yeah, because it seems that the issue is more internally, or the internal connectivity, and not only Luanda but the rest of the country. This kind of big gap or big difference between the Luanda reality and the rest of the country. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
right. And one of the things that I'm so doing, just to grab into the point you just mentioned now. Um, so eventually, in the past, I did a lot of analyzing where I was obsessed in looking where our user traffics went to. Right. So we wanted to optimize this on the best level possible. That's what we did in the past. At least we were young and we wanted more and more and more quality. More happy people at the end of the day. So we were looking into the traffic really on daily basis during the night, during the mornings, talking to each other, exchanging ideas, and try to learn from each other where the bottlenecks might be and where how we could fix those problems, right? But eventually, if we look into today's life, and people still don't realize that the strategy from back can still be applied now. And let me give you a context into what I just said. So if the problem back then was Luanda didn't had localized content and the content went overseas, imagine you living now in Lubango, Benguela, or whatever the city is, and you look for specific content which is not hosted in Luanda. Can you imagine what the latency will be from sending out the information not found in Luanda, so we need to go to Portugal now? It's even worse than living in Luanda because you still need to go to the south, right, to deliver this traffic. And so the same principles and the same strategy can and should be applied, I would say. I mean, it's a matter of willing many times.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sure, sure, sure. Yeah, and I know that data centers are also important of this whole infrastructure. I will hand over to Andre, who will have some questions to you regarding
Sure,
this. Thank you.
sure, definitely.
Thank you. Thank you, Victor. Darwin, you mentioned that one of the words that is very common to appear and to be in every page of the white books is digital transformation. Um, and to develop this digital transformation, apart from the IPv6 and all that, you need data centers. You need to create the infrastructure needed so that this development can happen. Uh, Angola recently, and ever since I've been there for the latest 16 years, it developed a large number of, well, not maybe not a large number, but it has many more data centers, and it has developed that area. But how can it develop into being a hub? What is needed to be a hub for the data centers in the region, and the data in the region?
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a very good point, Andre. I think, again, and going back to realities and day to day lives that we all have. We all might have children, or our friends might have children. And just think out loud how difficult it will be to explain to those new generations what a data center is, or what a subsea cable is. I mean, some will get interested to it, others will say, as long as I have internet access, don't bother me because I want to be on the internet, right? And so eventually the infrastructure is the crucial, is what everything starts with, right? So the start is the infrastructure. What you can achieve with the infrastructure which has been built is like, Bowie said in his video, the imagination can go much further than we are thinking nowadays, right? And so eventually you have many countries building a lot of megawatts data centers. I'm talking about megawatts data centers with with a lot of space to host and to collocate everyone or every business enterprise, and so on and so forth. And eventually Angola as couple of data centers. Yes, it does, right? Because you need data centers to host everything else, like internet exchange points. For the company where I work from, we are present in more than 500 neutral data centers. And let me stress myself a bit out on the word neutral, because how do you create an hub? If you want to become a hub of telecommunications, how do you become South Africa? How do you become Nigeria? Well, first, the frameworks on the regulatory basis and the network operators groups, whether networks are in it, everything needs to be aligned, right? Because you need to understand, okay, so what we are looking into become the next up, because we just built a cable from Africa to Brazil, which nobody has, right? And so eventually companies only will go to your country if, one, there is easy access into the landing stations where the cables are landing to, and eventually the
Mhm.
business don't happen where the cable lands normally. Now we are seeing a swift on our industry, but I will come to that in a bit. But eventually they need to go where the neutral data centers are. Why? Because there is where interconnection happens. And when I'm talking about interconnection, is where business happens, right? So eventually, let me just give an example of this construction company from Portugal, which has a lot of projects in Angola. Teixeira Duarte, I guess those are the guys, right?
Mhm.
Eventually those guys, to exchange information on a real-time basis, they will need to be, or they will need to have the point of presence in a neutral data center. Because if you don't if you are not in a neutral data center, the problem that might happen is, like, if you ask for a cable, like, you have your point of presence. I'm just thinking out loud, how can I put that
Mhm.
into a very basic words for our listeners, right? So just imagine, me myself, I'm Portugal Telecom, and Andre is Vodafone Portugal, and then I want to exchange traffic in your data center facility with, I don't know, Telecom Austria, for whatever reasons. Then you, as Andre, Portugal Telecom, might say, "Oh no, we're not gonna do that because we don't like this agreement so much." So they are the ones. I'm just using a couple of names. I'm not saying that this is the case, but they might be the ones dictating what happens inside the facilities, right? And if you go to neutral data centers, which might be managed by companies which are well known in the market, like the Equinix of the life, the digital realties of the life, so the Rexios or whatever you name it. There's a bunch of them out there, right? The only thing they do is managing data centers on a neutral way. So if you ask for a cable to be plugged from your equipment to the bank XYZ, they won't say no because you are paying the fee that they ask you to pay, right? If you end up in a non-digital data center, you might ask for that, but the price might be 10 times higher, that you will say, you know what, forget about it, we will find another ways to make this
Mm.
happen. And that's when neutrality comes into play.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, neutrality is whenever you have someone managing the data center that is someone who has no interest whatsoever on how the network works, but it wants to provide the service to the people and the companies that really want to do the interconnection, and they interconnect people without having second issues or any kind of other interest, not like having a company that has interest to connect with some providers in a specific terms. Oh,
Yeah.
I think that I understand. So what you think is that apart from what we have, we need to create also that kind of infrastructure with uh, that kind of provider that has no interest whatsoever in how they're connected.
Yeah, and I think I saw in the news somewhere last year that company called Raxio Data Centers where did
Mhm.
a groundbreaking within Angola, and I don't know what the current state is or not, but eventually those guys they are neutral, right? So the only thing they know how to do is managing data centers, and so neutrality is what we need within the country as well, right? Because in order to bring more business into place for Angola, and in order for us to be even more agile on the interconnection side of the things, yes, you need neutrality, and yes, you need neutral data centers.
Let's cross fingers they do that kind of agreement.
Definitely.
um, I'm going to pass to the future, and who's going to talk about it is Victor.
We have been talking about infrastructure and protocols and so on, but we need people to do all the managing of that and all the capabilities to optimize all those infrastructures and investments. Uh, and I'd like to hear from you what companies like DKIX are doing in order to build skills and transfer those skills into Africa in this case. And what could also Angola be doing to eventually close the capability gap that we certainly will need more and more yeah, in
Yep.
this area.
Yep. No, that's a very very good point, Victor, because um, we all know networks can be run it, but networks can be run it without people, right? So we need people. We need people behind the strategies. We need people to run business. So we need people for all of these, and eventually we'll cut this cake in two. At DKIX, what we do, not only for our customers, because we have two perspectives on how to do the capacity building, but one of the perspectives was we have something called the DKIX Academy. And the DKIX Academy, we write a lot of white papers, we write a lot of articles, and everything can be freely downloaded. So if you are network engineering, please just type into Google DKIX Academy. You're gonna find papers, and you're gonna find a lot of YouTube videos from our colleagues back in Germany, working heavily in having this kind of content easily for network engineers to know how to optimize their own network, right? Because at the end of the day, I think we are in a community where sharing is caring, and that's what we do, right? So for our own customers, what we normally do, and if they need that, obviously we have tons of customers, and this might be addressed by request, but we normally organize workshops with different couple of companies, obviously
Mhm.
in different sectors. Obviously you have the automotive industry, which needs more hours than a normal common network or internet service provider, which totally understand that what interconnection is, or and how interconnection works. For the enterprise type of business, you might need more days than just one day to try to explain them during workshops what this is all about, right? And why should cope or do all these changes that we just spoke during this podcast. On the Angola side of the thing, and even before COVID, and I think my wife almost killed me because it was the time when I left Angola and I joined DKX. I said, even that I left the country, it is on me to do something back, because I always like to do something back, right? And sometimes she called me, "Oh yeah, you are the church, and you open the doors to share all this knowledge to everybody," right? But eventually, we only grow as a persons. That's my personal feeling, my humble opinion. We only grow as persons if we share information with others, and not only sharing but also teaching others. Because eventually these new generations, they're gonna be doing things that we won't know in 30 years from now. you know let's be honest, I don't have a TikTok account. I don't want to have one, and I don't know how the TikTok works. But eventually I need to follow up a YouTube workshop or whatever, or a quick video, just to understand how it works, because of my children, right? Because we need to be on top of our game as well. So eventually, what I did back then in 2019, without knowing that we would have the pandemic 1 year after, was to build something called the Angolan Peering Forum. And this Angolan Peering Forum is an event where we bring up network engineers, national network engineers with international network engineers. The only thing we care about on those full weeks, because normally we organize during the full week, we only care about engineers speaking the same languages as another engineering coming from South America or coming from Asia would speak, right? So on that week, we are there to solve country problems. And so we try to avoid as much as possible the influence from governments or institutions which only wants to go there to promote their own brand and do this kind of stuff. No. This week normally happens in November of each year. We only focus ourselves on how to get better as a society, as a network engineers, and how to solve problems which we might not know, and which someone out of Portugal, someone out of Brazil might say, "Hey guys, did you ever thought about this? Why if we should do this on that way?" And eventually we exchange ideas, and we can go back after that week to our own business and tell our managers, "Hey, you know what, Unitel or Africell, I think we should be doing this, because IPv6 is the future. And if we don't do it, we're going to lose against our competition," right? And so I'm doing that, Victor, again on my personal capacity. It's once in a year. We normally organize these kind of events physically in Luanda. Obviously, everybody will say, "Oh," and I heard a lot, "Oh, you guys need to come to the provinces as well." Yes, we need to go everywhere, but we also need the support to be there, right? And eventually, everybody wants to have the logo on the sponsors slides, right? But not everybody is willing to pay. So we do that as a totally volunteers. We are a team of 7 people working on that project. Nobody gets paid, and we do it because we think the internet is here to stay, like Bowie said back in 99, and it will become more than we are just saying nowadays.
Yeah, that's great, and congratulations to you and the team that worked with you on that volunteering.
Thanks
Yeah,
for
yeah, that's really great. Yeah, I will now hand over to Evo for a final wrap up of
Well,
the
thank you, Victor. I think we addressed every single topic that we wanted to address on this episode. I want to give a big thank you to you, Darwin. Thank you so much for sharing your insights on these critical internet infrastructure topics that are so important for Africa. So it's clear that progress is being made, right? But
right.
there's still much work to be done in order to bring affordable, reliable, secure connectivity and connections to every single country in Africa. So we talked about IPv6 adoption and its importance for digital transformation. We talked about subsea cables, right? How the data is transferred between continents. We talked about the importance of IXPs for bringing the costs down in data communication and internet costs. We talked about the data centers, neutral data centers, right? So the importance of having more carrier neutral data centers, and the capacity building that Victor was talking about, and you addressed it, for building and as a key role, not just the infrastructure that we need to have in place, but all the people that we need to capacitate in order to build these solutions, to maintain these solutions, and evolve these solutions.
Right.
So I want to thank you once again, Darwin. I want to thank our listeners for tuning in. I don't know, you might be listening this on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on X. I don't know. But thank you for tuning in to this episode of Africa Tech Talks. So be sure to subscribe and share this episode with your networks, LinkedIn, TikTok. Even if Darwin doesn't use TikTok, we'll make his daughter open an account just for him, just to share a video with him. And let's keep the conversation going to build a more connected and prosperous Africa. So until next time, goodbye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.